Many researchers argue that they need access to social media data to study the real-world impacts of social media on society. These researchers could be from academia, they may be from civil society, or they may be journalists, but they all want to study questions related to the health of our online ecosystem. They may want to study questions like, how does disinformation spread online? And what interventions from social media platforms or governments or others actually work when it comes to addressing disinformation? They may want to ask, how do algorithms that are used to rank and recommend content impact what users see on social media? Or are social media platforms accurately enforcing their content moderation policies? These are just a couple of examples of the types of questions that independent researchers want access to data in order to try to answer. Right now, they have to rely on publicly available data or data that companies voluntarily make available. But many researchers are concerned about being too reliant on social media companies to voluntarily make data available to them. So in Europe, the Digital Services Act will be the first piece of major legislation that requires certain platforms to provide data to independent researchers. The requirement in the DSA is known as Article 40, and it will apply to the biggest companies that are defined as very large online platforms or very large online search engines in the DSA. Under DSA Article 40, researchers will have to be vetted and they'll have to meet certain criteria before they can get access to data. The DSA lays out those criteria, and they include things like being affiliated with an academic organization or a research institution, being independent from certain commercial interests, being capable of meeting privacy and security requirements, and other things that are listed in the statute. The way it will work is that the Digital Services Coordinator will award the status of vetted researcher to researchers who can meet those criteria, and then the coordinator will send requests for data to the very large online platforms, which will be required to respond with the data to the researchers. There are a lot of details that are still needed to be worked out in how DSA Article 40 will be implemented, and a lot of that will happen in the delegated acts that are being considered and worked on right now in Europe. In the US, in contrast, there's currently no law that requires social media companies to provide researchers with access to data. There have been various proposals that members of Congress have put forth, but they all vary depending on the details in the proposal. One thing a lot of those proposals in the US have in common is that they often rely on the idea of tiered access to data. So this is the idea that when data is very sensitive, only researchers that can meet very high vetting criteria would be able to access it. And then as data gets less sensitive, it may be made more widely available, and the very least sensitive data of all may even be made publicly available in the United States. Another concept that's being talked about a lot in the United States is the idea of a researcher safe harbor. So this would be a legal protection for researchers who engage in public interest research to ensure that they can't be civilly or criminally prosecuted for their research activities. So for example, if a researcher gathers data by scraping publicly available data from a social media site or by asking users to donate their data to the researcher, but those activities violate a social media platform's terms of service, a legal safe harbor would protect the researcher from being civilly liable for violating the terms of service. So one of the biggest obstacles and challenges is figuring out how to provide independent researchers with access to the data they need while still protecting user privacy. So we know that social media data can be sensitive. It can include things like a user's communications. It can include information about their health, their finances, their families, and other very personal information. And it's important that we get vetting of researchers right in order to ensure that only legitimate researchers who are conducting research in the public interest can get access to that type of sensitive and personal information when they're trying to study social media platforms. There are also technical measures that can be put in place to help ensure user privacy, like requiring researchers and platforms to encrypt data and store it securely, and requiring the use of virtual clean rooms, which are virtual environments that researchers can use to study data, but there are limits on removing the data from that virtual environment and maybe even on the types of ways that that data can be manipulated. And all of that can help protect user privacy. Another thing that can help protect user privacy are practical measures. So things like data minimization, which is the idea that researchers should be required to ask for only the minimal amount of data that they need in order to do their research. And also data destruction, which is the idea that data should be destroyed after research is completed, so it's not just available out there in the world for someone to potentially get access to. Another aspect that is related to privacy that's very important is to ensure that government actors don't gain access to social media data that's intended for researchers. So for example, we know that law enforcement agencies are often interested in social media data. And while sometimes legal demands for social media data can be justified and legal, unfortunately, in other cases, we know that law enforcement agencies have tried to access data for illegitimate purposes, like monitoring protesters. So we need to ensure that when we're making data available for researchers, that access doesn't open the door to unjustified gathering of social media data by law enforcement too.